Kiko, it is such a pleasure to honor you with the WAACC National Spotlight Award and also get to interview you because you have just such a treasure trove of experiences, and you're such a role model for everyone and particularly women. So thank you for letting us do this today.
Well, thank you. It's my pleasure.
So we're going to start with your childhood. Tell me a little about how you grew up, where you grew up, things like that.
Okay. Well, I was born in California, and I grew up in Southern California. My mother was born in Japan, and she grew up during World War II. And so she was about 16, I think, when the war ended. And my dad was an American, born in Los Angeles, and they met in Japan while he was on leave, and they correspond. They only went on one date, and then they corresponded, and he asked her to marry him, and they stayed married for a very long time before my mom passed away. So, yeah, so it was a good upbringing, very, very, I guess they call it middle class, but it was happy, and I'm an only child, so I had a good education. My dad worked at the University of Southern California, so I was fortunate enough to have a paid tuition, and I went to USC and got my master's in accounting there, and I'm still a very avid football fan, and still connected with the university in some volunteer work. So it's been great. My dad went there as well. So there were 2 generations, and then my daughter ended up going to USC.
Nice. I love the love story that you talked about with your parents. What about your Japanese influence from your mother? Tell us about that.
Well, my mother was a very, for her to marry an American, and it was in the 50s, so a lot of time had passed between the war. But for her to marry an American and come to the United States when she was not fluent in English, she spoke English, but she wasn't fluent, was a big step, and it was a very brave thing, I think, for somebody from her culture to do, and especially since food is a very important part of any Asian person's culture, and the food options in the United States really weren't suited that time. Now there's a lot of Asian markets and such, but there weren't at that time. She did something very interesting, actually. When I was a small child, I have memories of, she worked on the UCLA study of Japanese Americans who were placed in internment camps. And so she would interview them in Japanese, and then she would write up her notes, and she would translate them, and my dad would type them up for her. And that was part of this big UCLA study that was done, I guess, in the 60s, maybe in the early 70s. And so she did that, and I would go along with her. I just remember to a lot of carnation farms. There were some carnation farms in Orange County, and I just remember I loved going there because they would pick carnations for us, and we'd come home with armful of carnations, and they were such wonderful people. And I would play on the floor while they were interviewing and didn't have any understanding what they were talking about. But she was part of that group of people who were able to understand kind of what they had gone through. And so that was her, I think, contribution, if you will. So, but my mom, the interesting thing about my parents is that my mother was a very devout Catholic, and my dad wasn't, but converted later. They were married by a priest in Japan who is now beatified to be a saint. And I know, can you imagine, they were married by a saint? But he was, unfortunately, he was martyred in the Philippines after he left Japan. And so that, I guess, starts you on your path to sainthood. And then I think there's a couple miracles that need to be done, but after death, which is, a fascinating thing. But yeah, so she knew, and she knew a lot of very influential people, and so I never had a fear of not being able to get a job if I needed to, because my mom was very well connected. But luckily, I didn't have to use those connections. So,
Kiko, you are truly a Japanese American, and How do you feel about being Asian, and how has that impacted you throughout your, maybe in childhood and later?
I love the Asian culture. I think that I don't have as much familiarity with the Chinese and the Korean culture as much as I do the Japanese, because I've been to Japan several times. It is a very gentle culture that what I like about it as much, and my mother was very much this way, it's very giving. So one of the things I've noticed, especially in traveling to Japan, if there is, if you're sitting at a table and there's a view, they're always going to give the guest the best view, the best piece of cake, the best, it's just such a gift giving, but also just a generous kind of culture where it's not about you and the individual is not important. It's what you're giving to others. And so I think we could learn a little bit more about that. Unfortunately, I don't think I spent enough time in the culture to be able to impart that on my children as well. But it's just it's a wonderful culture. So that's what I take most about it.
I know you grew up in California where there are a lot of Asians.
Yes.
But did you face any type of discrimination, any type of bullying growing up being a Japanese American?
I think as a young child, because I may have been one of a handful of Asians that were in my elementary school, kids can be mean, and so of course they did the stereotypical thing. They would hold their eyes and those types of things. I was also pretty smart as a young child, so there was the teasing about being the brain or of that, and studying and playing piano and doing all the things that I wasn't in athletics. I did do ice skating, but again there wasn't a lot of team type things. So a little bit of teasing, but I never felt that there was any type when I got into college or in my career or even in high school, I really never felt that I was discriminated against in a negative way for being Asian. In fact, I think it's helped me more than hurt me in a lot of opportunities that I've been given. But underlying, you have to have the fundamental talent and capabilities to do any job. So you're not given anything because you're Asian or a woman. You have to have the skills, but you may get a second look, or you may be a preferred candidate because of it if there's if there's equals. So I think it's actually worked. Being a woman and being Asian has worked in my favor, but again, I don't get jobs I'm not qualified for. So it hasn't worked that much in my favor.
What about leadership? What was the earliest leadership position that you ever held? It could be, something that you didn't even have a title for, but that you took the initiative.
Well, it was probably in high school. If you're going to the earliest, I was the head of my cheer type squad. It was a letter carrying squad, but they did dance and stuff. So I was in charge of that. I was very good at organization. I also did I was always the team parent when it came to my children's volleyball, my daughter's volleyball. So, it was, I've always been very good at getting communication, getting people communicated to and getting them to the places that they need to be and have the information that they needed and all that. So that part, I would say, is the social part of that. Of course, and I've had leadership positions since I was at PwC or Price Waterhouse early on. And that starts early in your career. You start almost in your third year as starting to supervise people, and then you manage them, and then you direct them and such. So I've always been in a bit of a running department type role, department head.
Do you think you got that from your mother?
My mother she didn't go to college, but she was always, the whatever organization she was in, she was the vice president or the president or the secretary, or yeah. My mom was a very different kind of Asian woman. She was very social. She was not demure. She spoke her mind, and so do I. And everybody loved her, and an amazing cook. So if all else fails, cook, right?
Very good point. Tell me, you have so many outstanding characteristics about you, but deep down inside, what is the driving characteristic that you have that has made you so successful?
Earlier on, I would say it would just be hard work, right? You could just work hard. If you worked longer hours and you put in more effort, you would get further along. That stops at a certain period of time, I think probably in mid-career, where just working hard doesn't get you where you want to be. I'm an incredibly good networker, and I not only cherish the relationships that I have with others, but you also have to work on them and keep in touch and foster them. And I would say now it's more of my interpersonal ability to collaborate, to try to reach a win-win situation in the roles that I've had, especially since I've been in internal audit, as well as the Inspector General role that I have right now. I'm usually not communicating good information or happy information. I usually am bringing very, very bad news. And so it's the ability to deliver bad news and not make people feel bad about it, right? And put there's some level of hope in, we can fix this. And I would say that teamwork and collaboration and such have really helped me in my more senior years in my career, whereas just working hard and long hours got me where I needed to be early on, but certainly now it's just the value isn't there for that.
You have had just an amazing career, and you were the VP of Starbucks, Delta Airlines, and then now you're the Inspector General at the United Nations. That is such a huge leap in my eyes. Tell me about that transition.
Well, this has been, so the Inspector General role is it's a very senior role. It's a very important role. It's a bigger job than I've ever had before. But I guess as you move up in your career, it's okay to step into bigger jobs. I'm responsible for investigations, which I've never had the responsibility for investigations before. So that part's new. It's a very interesting job. It's I would say that it contributes greatly to how the UN organization that I work for runs, and so it's I would say it's very rewarding, but it's a big job. It's very different than anything I've ever had to do before. I'm a diplomat, if you will, so I deal with ambassadors and I deal with governments, and I've never, in the private sector, I didn't have that experience. I dealt with boards, but I didn't, you didn't really deal with the situation that I have now, and it's fascinating and and it warms your heart to see how countries work together to solve the common problem of starvation and hunger. And there are countries that I think the United States would consider, they think of them as enemies, but they sit right next to each other and they work together. And I think seeing that is very, and seeing everybody being equal and all the countries having an equal say, whether you're a country that donates money or you're receiving benefits as an implementing partner of the UN. I think all of seeing that work and being close up to it really gives you a lot of hope that we can diplomatically solve a lot of the problems that the world has. And you can see it on the humanitarian side, it works. So hopefully on the political side, it'll start working as well.
Well, that's a great story. And you know, you don't see that in the news. You don't
No.
hear about the good news.
No.
We know that good news doesn't sell. But that's really, really refreshing to hear that. So it sounds like you love your job.
I do.
What about any surprises? I mean, you know, you went from the corporate world to being an inspector general at the UN. Were there any surprises with this job?
I didn't realize how public my role was. So I didn't know very much about the United Nations when I joined the World Food Program. I didn't know very much about the World Food Program at all because the United States does not have the level of starvation. There may be hunger, but they're not the level of starvation that Africa has, and you know, some countries in the Middle East and South America have. So as the United States, we don't really hear about the World Food Program as much. So I wasn't as knowledgeable. I think the surprise was that how the formality of everything, the protocol that we have, the way that we address each other, the note verbals that we have to send to each other when we're communicating government to UN to government. The fact that I'd have delegations in my office that are interested in what we're doing and concerned about certain matters. So that kind of the jumping in at a relatively high level and not having the experience, the diplomatic training, if you will, I think was the biggest obstacle to overcome. You know, you just can't say what's on your mind all the time. You have to really choose your words very carefully. And again, so much of what you say is transcribed. It becomes public knowledge. All of my audit reports are public. So you start to really kind of understand that, you know, there's stakeholders beyond your shareholders. You know, the stakeholders are everybody who pays taxes, every citizen of the world becomes your stakeholder in some way. So it's very different.
You know, going back to what you said about the U.S., we don't have, you know, starvation here. But is there a part of you that feels like there is something that the U.S. needs to take care of while we're feeding the world? Sure. You know, we don't have starvation, but there are so many pockets in the U.S. where people are hungry.
Well, there are, and again, the World Food Program only deals really with, there's about 300 and some odd million starving people in the world, and we can only feed about 90 to 90 million or so. So we're dealing with severely malnourished children, women, lactating mothers. Most of our beneficiaries are going to be women and children, and also, you know, just the starving. So we are dealing with a different subset of hunger. The United States, I think, first of all, one of the most generous nations in the world. I don't think unfortunately, I don't think the U.S. taxpayer understands how much the U.S. gives to the world at large on the humanitarian side, especially in the area of food. You know, part of the Farm Bill allows us to have some of the donations in kind that come from the vast resources we have in agriculture here in the U.S. and that all that food feeds the world. And unfortunately, we don't advertise that enough. So I don't think that people understand the good that the U.S. as well as all the other generous nations do. Europe is amazing. The European Union is extremely generous, and as is anybody else who can. So we don't. I think what America needs to do a little bit better is understand the world outside of our borders, and become. I think maybe Europeans are a little bit. The rest of the world is better at knowing what's going on. We tend to, because we're big and we have 50 different states, 50 different countries, if you will, or little governments to deal with. I think we can become quite isolated. We're also isolated kind of, you know, by water or by two countries who are allies of ours or good friends. But we tend to not know about or follow a lot of what's going on in the world. And I think if we could broaden that, if we could learn different languages, where everybody else learns a different language, every other country, most people speak 2 languages. We speak 1. Some of us speak more, but I think just broadening our perspectives would be helpful. But again, fundamentally, great nation.
And you talk about broadening perspectives. Oh, we could use this right now, couldn't we?
Oh, I'll
Kiko?
tell you, yeah. And it's a good, the problems that the U.S. are having in race relations and in the BLM movement, that's all been a very important, sad but important wake-up call, I think, for the rest of the world to go through as well, and to start the conversation. Racism is prevalent in the world. It exists, and it's not always the way that we see it in the United States. There's racism across religions, across all sorts of, even between tribes themselves in Africa. There's still tribal tension in certain countries. So there's a lot that needs to be attended to, but at least the conversation has started. Because you have to, it's too bad that it's taken this long, but hopefully the people who lost their lives haven't lost them in vain, and so something good can come of it.
Getting back to where you said this is the first job that you've actually had to do inspections, and since you are the Inspector General of the World Food Program, what kind of travel are we talking about for your life?
Sure. Well, my team travels more than I do, because they work, they actually do the work, and when I travel, I mostly meet with ambassadors, and I'm mostly in meetings that are more, I wouldn't say, please do not think that I'm doing diplomatic missions, and that's really not my role, but that we have, I have more meetings. So, and people, tend to congregate and have meetings with me and such. So I'm not really doing the work. So I don't go to the field as much. I've been to Uganda a couple times. I've been to Juba, South Sudan. I've been to Nairobi, Ethiopia a few times. I've done most of my travel in Africa. I haven't yet traveled with the Middle East. I was actually supposed to be doing a big tour of the Middle East now, but COVID kind of hit and put a stop to that. But this year was supposed to be the Middle East. Next year was supposed to be South America. So, so eventually we'll get back to being able to go out to the field and see our operations. And be able to see that. But we travel where there's no commercial air travel. So, we'll go to maybe Addis in Ethiopia, but then if we need to go to where the people are needing the most, or where our operations are, we're going to be traveling by UN aircraft, by the Humanitarian Air Services that is actually run out of my organization. So we'll take different types of aircraft to go. Like when I went to the border of Somalia, I had to be on an UNHAS flight, or a UN Humanitarian Air Service flight, because there aren't commercial aircraft that will travel into those locations. So,
and when you get on location, it must be an amazing eye-opener, good and bad, right?
Mostly good, because you're seeing people who are, first of all, very thankful for what they're receiving. They're receiving health care, they're receiving food, they're receiving nutritious food that they don't have readily available for them. There's a lot of problems in agriculture, in water supply, and all of that in Africa, and so they really just don't. They're so grateful to see the children playing, even though they're playing with they don't have proper toys, but they're still happy and they're smiling, and they come up to you and they hug you, and they're just you see that there's they don't, even though they're kind of living in a way that you and I would probably feel bad for them, they're happy. And they're getting fed, and they're playing with each other, and like children play, and that's very rewarding. But you worry about their future, but it's nice to see that there's some level of normalcy that they have created for themselves. So yeah, it's a wonderfully rewarding job. I do a different part of, there's procurement people, there's what I do, but we all play our part. We're not in operations where we're actually delivering food to people, but we're making sure the food gets to the people, and isn't diverted along the way.
What is your personal mission with this World Health Program? Does that constantly change as you visit different countries as well?
Usually my personal goal when I go out is to foster communication and to clear up misunderstandings and such, because a lot of, so when governments give their money to the World Food Program, and we hire other NGOs and such. So we're the largest humanitarian organization in the world that people probably have never heard of, because we hire the Save the Children, the Oxfam, and all of these other more kind of well-known, well-marketed organizations to deliver the food or work on the ground for us. So we do that as well. But just going out and explaining what my department does, and helping these governments understand how their money is protected, or how their food is being protected from loss, I think is very helpful. Again, clearing up misunderstandings. A lot of times there's rumors, and we use biometrics a lot for providing, making sure that the benefits go to the right people, or go to the targeted people who need it. And biometrics have privacy. Biometrics, it has a whole different concern, especially when you're dealing in places where religion may be a defining factor for discrimination or even harm to people. So the protection of all of that private data is something that my internal audit department worries about, and so we have to communicate how that's being done, and and how we're comfortable with it and such, because people worry, and or how we're not comfortable if something needs to be improved. So yeah, so it's primarily a communications mission when I go out.
You touched on it a little earlier, but let's talk about you as a woman leader. You're amazing. And how you got to be the Inspector General is just an incredible journey. But what would you give as advice or recommendations to up and coming, or even anybody, male or female?
Sure. The advice that I would give to people is, you need to find a job that you love. You will never be successful in a job that you don't love. So even if you don't love the place that you're at, you need to leave. And you have to have the courage to leave. And I haven't left because I haven't been happy with my employers. But I do see people at times who work places who are just miserable. If you're miserable, you need to find something else to do. Someplace else to do it. And it doesn't mean you have to switch careers, but it just may be just changing it up. So have the courage to know when it's time to leave, and have faith in yourself that you will find something meaningful to do, and also explore. If I had it to do over again, I would have done an international expat assignment earlier. See the world, live in the world, If it's an incredible opportunity, learn a language. I have not learned my language yet, but I'm supposed to. But in work in a global setting, and see how the world works together, because I think you will be a lot less cynical. It's working in the United Nations has helped me understand that there is a tremendous amount of cooperation that goes on, and there is, and it is not, countries don't hate each other. They don't. They come together when there's a problem to be solved and they solve it. And I think we need to understand that that is how things work. I think that works in a microcosm in the United States as well. We see a lot of things on the news. I don't even watch the news anymore. I watch a little bit, I read it, versus watching people yell at each other. There's no value to the anger and the mean-spiritedness. And that isn't really how countries behave when they're at least it's not what I've witnessed. And so I think a little bit, take the volume down, take the emotion out a little bit, and let's start communicating more thoughtfully. And I think if people had broader perspectives, and again, I wish I had done an international assignment when my children were young and could have exposed them to living in a different country, and seeing the benefits. Also, when you come back to the United States, you recognize what we have, and it helps a lot to be thankful for what you have and the convenience of what we have and the choices that we have to make here. And there's just not the same choices in other countries. Not bad, but different. So I think I would definitely, if people can get an international assignment, take it. And then do what you want to do and what you're good at. Helps if you're good at what you're doing too. You can't just love something and then not be good at it.
Good point.
Yeah.
Good point.
Find something you're good at and then exploit that.
Kiko, one of your strengths, is it being assertive and speaking up? Have you always been that way?
I have, and that's not necessarily a strength. So I have tried, and it's been easier, I think, in this current role that I have, to listen more, speak less, like they would say in Hamilton. I like that big song in Hamilton. But, not every thought I have needs to be expressed. And my thoughts don't trump other people's. And I think it took me a long time to learn that. Because I'm the type that if I'm so afraid that I'll forget what I'm going to say, that I'll just blurt whatever's in my mind. And the filter has never been there for me. And I think it's better now because I'm in a protocol environment where there is no opportunity to just blurt something out. I mean, questions are asked, they're translated, you hear them in English through your earbud, and you write them all down, and then you speak at the end. And that discipline is something that I think, I lacked. So assertive isn't necessarily always good. It's better than aggressive, I suppose. But if I think, having had it to do over again, I think I would have probably written my thoughts down, organized them better, and then spoke, right? Plus, it would have helped all of the introverted people that I've been working with all along who are like, "Ay, this woman."
Well, I think it's refreshing because I work with so many women who won't speak up. They're afraid to speak up. They feel like they're in the white man's world. So I think it's wonderful.
Well, and what I have to say about that is, I've worked with a lot of people who get very frustrated because they're not heard or their ideas aren't heard, but they're also not shared. So do not expect people to be able to read your mind. Even though that might have been your idea that somebody just shared, if you aren't courageous enough to speak it, they aren't going to know. They just don't know what's inside your head. So at some point you have to find your voice, whether it's written. Some people feel much more comfortable sending an email, writing a paper, that's fine, but find the way that you're comfortable communicating, but make sure you're participating in the discussion. Because too many people, get unhappy and mad because they feel like they're being ignored, but they haven't even said anything to, they have to participate to be ignored. And you can get mad if you're participating in people ignoring you, but you can't get mad when it's all stuck inside your head.
Good point. Good point. So Kiko, you're so optimistic and you're fun. How do you deal with negative people?
I probably am not as patient with people who are negative, and I've seen a lot of negativism, especially with the COVID-19 lockdowns. People, I think you have to be kind, and you have to understand that people are dealing with this differently. And so I've had, I've had friends and employees that have, taken it just, the world is ending. Oh my gosh, this will, will never be normal again. And then I have those that are saying, this is no big deal. Nobody's gonna, this really, you don't get that sick. Oh, not that many people die, there's some sort of you have to understand that people deal with stress differently. And so kindness helps a lot. And just in giving, cutting people a little bit of slack when they aren't always behaving perfectly. And so, because again, you don't know what's going on in their personal lives, and people handle stress very, very differently. And so, and their circumstances are different. There are some people who are living alone, feeling very, very isolated. Some people are good with that. Like, I'm okay with it, but I know people who work for me that are isolated who are very sad. And so it's just, people handle things differently. And I think just understanding that we're all, dealing with it. It's in a way, it's not good, but in a way it's been a similar experience for everybody because it's a worldwide epidemic. So it's not just the United States, or it's not just happening to this company or anything. It's happening all over the place. So I think we're all in it together has helped a little bit. But you have some people who just take it personal. This is all about me. I lost my job, and it was as though you completely forget there's a pandemic going on and there's no revenues coming in. It's just, how dare they do this to me? And so I think that we need to understand that we'll get past this.
What inspires you, motivates you, makes Kiko get out of the bed in the morning?
I'm a list maker. So I have my list, my to-do list. I still have it written, by the way, because even though there's all sorts of technology that will help me, put it on my computer, I still like to, I love the feeling of being able to cross something off my list. And so I have a very large list of things that need to get done. I get 10% of them done, but I recognize my list is too long and I might need to be a little more realistic. But it's actually accomplishing things. I like to get things done. I do not like, and I'll work on something until it's complete. I don't like leaving tasks half finished. So with me, I'm still task driven, which isn't great when you're at my level. But I still like to, tick something off my to-do list. So I'm a little bit still obsessive that way.
Well, what's left on this bucket list for you that is something, with a real goal-oriented?
Professionally, not a lot, because there's a lot of things I need to do and accomplish in my job, but I'm on the right path for getting those things done. So I don't think I'll leave my role, whether it's in my first contract or even at the extended contract. I don't think I'll leave a lot of stones unturned or feel bad about my contribution. I think if most of the things on my bucket list are not professional, they're more personal. Reuniting or developing stronger relationships with friends that I've lost touch with. Those types of things I think are becoming much more important to me. Little things like making sure that we're healthy and it's not a little thing, but making sure that we're healthy and that and that the house is in order and those types of things I think have become smaller projects. I don't have travel lust, so I've been a lot of places in the world. in retirement, I'm not going to be the person that needs to get on an airplane and see the world. I'm going to be very happy staying here, volunteering, being on boards, and doing that kind of work. I'm become quite the homebody. So, and I love movies. So yeah, so the quarantine wasn't quite so bad for me.
And you mentioned travel. Well, you worked with Delta, so obviously you had a lot of perks and traveled then, and now it's the Inspector General. It's, you know,
I get to go
travel.
to places that most people don't go now.
Thank you. Yeah.
But all rewarding, all very interesting, and so yeah, I treasure my time in the U.S. and really the convenience under which we so often take things for granted. Things are very easy here. Things are not very easy everywhere else. So.
Do you consider yourself as a spiritual person?
I do. Spiritual more than religious, I would say. I have very strong beliefs. I believe, this isn't even a religion, I very much am so I do things ethically and right because I'm a firm believer in karma. I think bad things will happen if I do the wrong thing, and they'll happen to me. And so just don't do the wrong thing, because karma will get you. And again, that's not a religious, it's not a karma in the religious sense. It's just it's just kind of a fear I think I've had. But yeah, I have my fundamental beliefs, but again, I'm not terribly religious. My mom would turn in her grave to hear that. But yeah, I'm comfortable in my belief system.
And finally, tell me, what legacy do you want to leave, either professionally, personally, or both?
Well, the most important legacy you can leave, I think, is that you've left that my children will grow up and be, contributors to whether it's their work or society or the world at large. So, and that I've raised them correctly, and then I'll leave that legacy behind, and they'll be good people, honest people. And so that's the most important to me. I think professionally, I want to make a difference. I think the role that I'm in right now helps a lot more than the roles that I've been in the past. They were all very important to the organizations I worked for, but this is one goes beyond the organization and has fingers out into actually helping the world somewhat. So that's my contribution and my legacy, if you will. So I'm comfortable that I'm on a path to achieve that. I just don't want to do any harm, right? I don't want to leave the world worse off than I came into it. So, and that I've personally done something that has caused some sort. I just want to, if I can leave without creating damage, I'm going to be pretty happy.
I can assure you, there's no problem with that.
I hope not.
No chance of that. Kiko, it has been such a pleasure to be with you. This is for the WAACC National Spotlight Award, and thank you so much, and thank you for making such a great impact on everybody and the world.
Thank you. Quite an honor, and it's always great to see you.
Thanks
a lot.